Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. This is your host, Tony Cañas, and today we're doing a fun career conversation. Today I have with me Michael Derkacz. I believe that I got that pronunciation halfway correct. And Michael has had a awesome insurance career, basically. And he's currently not at an insurance carrier, which allows him to actually come on the podcast, which he probably couldn't if he was currently on carrier payroll. So I jumped on it and asked him for the favor of coming on the show so that the newer kids can hear a great insurance story, basically. So Michael, for the career chats, basically, like when I'm interviewing co-founders, I ask them for the elevator pitch. For the career chat, it's more of a how did you end up in insurance, and kind of walk us through your career?
Well, that sounds great. So again, my name's Michael Derkacz. Me and Tony met a few weeks ago, talked about my background, and he said, hey, do you want to share any of the sort of lessons learned, best practices? And that's what I'm going to do today. I think that's what we'll focus on. So you can see white hair, a little bit older, 30 years business experience, most of that around driving business transformation. So think about project management, PMO, think about management consultant, but it's all about driving change. It's thinking about where are we now, where do we want to be in the future, getting all that information, making that compelling business case to senior executives. So creating the strategy and then transferring over to the implementation part of it. I've met great strategists who sometimes maybe can't execute, thinking deep thoughts. I've also met great project managers who are so focused on what they want to deliver, sometimes they forget the why. Why are we at this? What can we do if we expand our scope and think a little bit more broadly and get even better results, right? So business transformation, but I've also run operations. So I know what it's like to have the pain of the daily numbers you have to hit, employee issues that may come up, and then someone like me comes along and says, hey, and we have to do this change. And then, oh, one more thing. Oh my God, how am I going to, right? So that is my background. I've been in financial services for 30 or so years now, those two career paths, and insurance for the last dozen. So let me ask you, is there any questions or comments, Tony, that you think the audience might want to know?
Absolutely.
Should I dive in?
Number one, thank you for the very simple explanation of what exactly is business transformation, because we hear the word transformation just all the time. Number two, the strategy versus implementation kind of dichotomy, super interesting, right? I've seen lots of carriers bring in big name consulting companies. We're talking the McKinseys of the world, spend millions of dollars on McKinsey or Deloitte, and get a fancy report that gets put on the shelf and never executed on. And maybe that was the plan from the beginning, whatever. But like the big consulting firms are not execution firms, right? They're consulting firms. And then
some straddle the line a little bit, but generally you're right. Yes.
And then the what I had not thought of, so this was something I already learned, is this idea of project managers who are great at managing the project, but they're not strategists, right? What needs to be done, right? And the project management field is a very interesting field. I took one class in my MBA. I'm not a certified PMP. But I took one class in my MBA, and what I remember is how basically if you learn project management and you're good at the tools of project management, get yourself certified as a PMP, it doesn't matter what the project's about. You can manage a project in any field, basically, if you're good at the tools of project management. But of course, the problem is going to be you can't contribute to the strategy because you don't understand the actual business. So anyway, I liked all of those things. And also, one question that I know the audience is going to have is the move from financial services to insurance. And insurance is technically part of financial services, but basically, socially, people get a lot of credit, a lot of glamour for working for American Express or KeyBank or some of the other companies that you worked with on the financial side. And generally, we get no credit or negative credit socially for working in insurance. So I am curious, that transition post financial services into insurance, did you feel like a failure for a while? Was that accidental? Anyway, so that's the things
I
that
hear
I'm.
what you're saying. I definitely did not feel like a failure. I don't feel it was a step down at all. And when I get into what we're going to talk about, some of the key lessons, you'll see why, because it is transferable. But you covered a lot of grounds there. So when I started doing business transformation, it wasn't called that. It was called re-engineering, and that was the days when Six Sigma was becoming popular and things like that, right? And it's evolved. Things always change, right? So there's other words used now like change management and business transformation, and people talk about all different ways of describing it, but it remains the same. Where are we now? Where do we want to be in the future? Why? That why is critical. If you can't answer the why, you're not going to be able to execute your strategy. Not only do you need to answer that question why, but you need to get people engaged. True process change, when you're really thinking at a macro level, is following the customer's journey. And the customer is not thinking about a single silo. If we think about insurance, they're not just thinking about the claim handling. They're interested in from beginning to the end. How was this sold to me? What was it told it was going to cover or not? Was it clear to me? Right? So that underwriting process, right? And then when the claim does come up, why was it paid or not? Does the customer understand that entire picture and put it together, right? So back to your other point about strategy to implementation, again, there's great that can do either, but bringing the two together is my wheelhouse, right? And I often get feedback from people saying, well, you don't have all of the content knowledge. And I say, yes, look at my 30-year career. Look at what I've done. Look at the different areas. One recruiter actually called me a mini CEO because I work cross-functionally. In addition to working cross-functionally, I work up and down the organization. So all of the C-level conversations, what is our strategy? What does it need to be? Why do we want that? And then also down the organization. And Tony, I spent a lot of time with the people who are answering phone calls or doing the FNOL setup or adjudicating claims, for example, because that's where the rubber hits the road. So it's back and forth and up and down. Think of a plus sign with arrows on it. So names of business transformation have changed, right? How it's done is different by different people. But that's sort of my answer to your question. And the last part, how I got into insurance, right? So career of driving change, financial services organizations, internal employee, did some external consulting. And I was recruited to one of the large carriers. I don't know if you can say the names or not,
Uh,
but they were
for,
looking to do
for,
transformation within their contact center space.
from my
And they
perspective,
liked
you can
that.
say carrier names, no problem.
Okay, well that was AIG. That was my entree into insurance, and it was their global ONS department, operations and systems. The
So,
sub area was this
talk
contact center.
about getting thrown into insurance in the deep end. AIG.
Well, the AIG was a huge company, and this was right before the financial crisis. So a lot had changed over my 8 years with them. But that was the entree to them. And what they were looking for in that department was the ability to do that current state assessment, create that strategy, and achieve the executive buy in through delivery. That was my sweet spot. Unfortunately, the financial crisis hit. Guess what? That department, well, kind of imploded, right? But from there, I moved to their travel business, and I did a lot of work there for them. And I can talk about the detailed work if you'd like, or maybe that's a subsequent conversation. And I moved through the organization. They moved their headquarters from Jersey City to Texas. I didn't move to Texas at the time. That's what brought me to the employment business at AIG, employee benefits business. They decided to move their business onshore to another part of Texas, so that didn't work. And my last role was maybe the most rewarding of all at AIG. It was basically setting up claims departments at 3 shared service centers around the world. So think about if you want to set up claims processing, you're migrating work from maybe a half a dozen or so countries in a region to a shared service center. What do you need to do? Everything, right? You need to think about hiring people. You need to think about your span of control. How many people do you need? How many supervisors? How many managers? How do you put that all in place? Well, great. Now you got a bunch of people. Guess what? They may not have had claims handling background. Got to train them. Not only train them, but train them in the way we want to handle these express claims, as we call them, that had relatively short tails across multiple lines of business. Okay, great. Now you got a bunch of people. They're trained. Takes a long time to train them. You need the space, all the infrastructure. You need the computers in place. You need the telephony in place. What we found out was the people who did the initial planning said, okay, you can receive an inbound call from a customer from the home country to, say, Kuala Lumpur, but they didn't set up outbound phone calls. How do you adjudicate a claim? How can you? No, you can't talk. So we had to set that up, right? So think about everything that needs to be done. And we put that in a project plan. We knew it was going to take a certain amount of time to set that up. And we were so successful at doing that that we expanded our scope to not just the claims handling, but the upfront FNOL setup process. And we did one more thing. Not every country had the positive business case to migrate because of labor arbitrage, but we took that express handling plan, we shrunk it down, and we said, okay, if you're not migrating to Kuala Lumpur, for example, if we're thinking about Southeast Asia, here's how you can utilize it in Thailand, Vietnam, other countries that didn't migrate. Here are the best practices for adjudicating your claim. So that's what brought me to AIG. That's what brought me to insurance. It has not been a step down. There's been no regrets. I've loved the work I've done at Chubb and elsewhere after AIG. And let me pause there. So I covered a lot of grounds. I think I hit a lot of your points. Questions or comments? What would
Yeah,
you like
no,
to
this
bring
is
up?
this is fantastic. Yeah, and I personally, uh, I think insurance is a much better career than traditional financial services. Very often, I get calls from finance majors who, for whatever reason, ended up working in insurance, and they call me feeling like they failed in life. And I started the conversation with you actually got really lucky. You ended up at a much better industry. Now let's help you find the right place in this much better industry. So Six Sigma still very popular in what I've seen in operations and transformations. For people coming from being an underwriter or being a claims adjuster or being a call center leader or some sort of operational role, not in the transformation space, who would love to get into a more project-based role, what advice would you have for them?
Well, a couple things, right? So, first of all, you'd want to be in an organization that understands the transferability of skills and really wants to take some people from sort of line organizations to these project management type teams. Some companies are a little more amenable to that, some aren't. You brought up Six Sigma, and I'll just do a sidebar on training in general, right? A lot of training we kind of know subconsciously, unless it's something very technical, for example. But training is good because it takes certain things that maybe we know from a subconscious to a very active level. But the second benefit is when multiple people have the same training, now you have a common language dialogue to talk about things, right? So those are some of the things you learn within project management. And there are ways to do them. And there's some people who are highly trained, certified, educated, right? And they do their thing. But again, my sweet spot is that ability to create a business strategy and then implement it. So, again, different people have different roles. Six Sigma really came up about, if I recall properly, maybe from the medical industry. And it was really looking at error rates in terms of surgery that were essentially life threatening. But when you expand it to business, it's no longer about likelihood of dying, right, from a mistake, but it's counting the mistakes and figuring out how to figure, what is a reasonable number. So I don't want to go too deep into Six Sigma. It's a great methodology.
Perfect.
I think it was brought to GE first, and from there it went to other companies. American Express adopted it as well. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit. Oh, you brought up sort of maybe financial services versus insurance. So here's something I learned a long time ago. Maybe it bears repeating, right? When you think about capitalism, and we're now up at 50,000, 100,000 feet level, right? You need credit, right? You want to, as a consumer, you want credit to do your grocery shopping, buy a car, buy a house. Business needs credit. They want to build a building, build a bridge, whatever, right? You can't just give people credit. You want to make sure that you can get your money back. Well, how does that happen? That's where insurance comes in, right? This is why we have automobile insurance, right? You can drive the car, you can lease it without even fully owning it. But if there's an accident, the leasing company is going to make sure that you have insurance to cover the loss, right? So you can't have capitalism, you can't have credit without insurance. They go hand in hand.
100%.
So I get a little frustrated like you when someone says, oh, investment banking is the greatest thing in the world. It all goes together, right? And if we start finding the commonality things, the world will be a better place. But that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah,
So let
agreed.
me let me ask you: can we talk a little bit about some of the lessons I've learned of what I
Absolutely.
call the three threes?
Absolutely.
So these are things that I learned at American Express. I've honed over time. I put it on a one pager, and I've shared it with all my operational and project teams for the last dozen or years or so. And I call it the three threes. People have called it Michael's mantra. Other people have called it an MBA on a page. But it's how I think, and it goes to what I talked about at training a few minutes ago, is it provides a common platform. Now we all know we have daily things to do in our jobs. I need to get this report done. I need to set up this FNO. I need to adjudicate the claim. But the way you become successful in business is by thinking of the bigger picture. And this is what I'm always thinking about. I want my teams to think about the same way. The first set of threes is around shareholder value. How can you reduce costs or increase revenue? Shareholders are critical. But shareholders aren't in a vacuum. You have customers. We've already talked about customers a little bit. So, customer satisfaction. But it's not measuring an NPS or a VOC score or any number. It's really drilling down and looking at the products and the services you offer and say, how can I improve them? That's what drives the improvement in your customer sat numbers. Those two are pretty obvious, makes sense. The third of the first set of threes, people overlook. When you think about driving change, it needs to be implemented, right? Now, the project manager is going to help guide that implementation, but it's going to be adopted by business units, by people, by employees. And I hate to say it, but sometimes when you're making these big strategic decisions, the employee, and by extension, the vendor, is forgotten. Do they know what needs to be done? Do they know how to do it? Do they have the resources to be successful? Do we have a realistic time frame for this, right? You have to think about your employees. And when I diagram this, it's a circle with three arrows because one feeds the other. Neither one is more important than the other, right? We all have heard it's better to retain a customer than acquire a new one. How do you do that? By employees who are knowledgeable, right? And all of that then drives that shareholder volume because then your business expands and the price. It's wonderful stuff, right? But think about those three things for a second as a stool. You can do a single initiative that might focus on one at maybe the expense of the other two. But your entire portfolio, your entire business has to be balanced. If not, think about what happens, you know, if you purely want to drive employee satisfaction, the answer might be sure, pay me $1 million an hour and unlimited vacation time. Well, guess what? That's not a job anymore, and your circle is going to fall apart. Okay. If you ask the customer, what would I want in a perfect world? I would want every good and service for free. Well, guess what? That's not a business. So that's silly too. You can't do that. And of course, the shareholder is always thinking, yeah, I want all the revenue, but I don't have any costs of running a business. Well, that's not realistic either. So you have to have a balance across these three things, and they have to be reasonable. That's the first set of three. So let me pause there.
I,
Questions,
I, I
reaction
agree.
about
I agree
shareholder,
completely.
customer,
Yeah,
employee?
no, I agree completely. Great way to put it super simply. I'm a fellow MBA and a big business nerd. Um, I fear that too often the employee is the weakest link, or not the weakest link, but when something's got to give, the employer is the one that suffers, and we could. I believe that businesses could get away with that. I'm not saying it was a good thing that they got away with it, but they could get away with that back in a world of lifetime employment and corporate loyalty. That world is long gone. So now, in a world where employees can pretty easily vote with their feet, and now in the remote world, not even move, we have to get employee engagement right, and it's very hard. So I'm so glad that you actually actively mentioned it as a balance of the three, including the employee piece. Um,
No,
yeah.
it's critical. All three of those pieces need to work together. If any one of those is missing, your three-legged stool
Oh,
falls over. It just doesn't work,
and
right?
for change efforts, if the employees don't buy in, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at the problem. Right?
It's
Let them.
and even salary isn't money isn't enough, right? Because a good employee actually wants to feel good at the end of the day, end of the week, end of the month. I did something successful. I made a difference. I helped a customer. I helped a fellow colleague, right? I don't think people are essentially money grabbers, right? And there's always going to be some bell curve, and okay, maybe some. And the other end, there are
Yeah.
going to be some people who really just want to do their job, and this is it. But most people, I think, really want to do more, right? And want the
Yep.
ability to have
100%.
an impact.
The
Yeah.
research, my anecdotal experience agrees, and the research in general agrees. And I do think also businesses make a mistake in paying too much attention to salary and not enough attention to the rest of the characteristics of a good job. And a lot of really old fashioned leaders have this perception of if we throw more money at a crappy job, people will do a better job at it. Uh, no, you
They
have to
may
make it a
stay
good
for the
job.
short term. They may
Exactly.
stay for the short term because look, everybody, essentially wants more money or to a point needs more money, right? But money isn't everything. It's part of that again, satisfaction and self pride, right? So the whole human element is sometimes forgotten, and you're aware of the phrase, right? Service or servant leadership. So I have a one pager that discusses that, right? So, you mentioned old fashioned, right? In the old days, it was great. You're in the corner office, you're sitting back, you've got your feet up on the desk, you're smoking a cigar, whatever that old fashioned image of success might have been, right? And that person was at the top of the pyramid, right? Flip the pyramid upside down. When I think about the operational groups I've run, I've all different sizes. Sometimes there are a couple dozen of people. Sometimes there are 150 or so people, right? Multiple departments, right? Depends on the role, right? But I'm thinking about my direct reports. The weight is on my shoulder. How can I help them be more successful in their job? And I teach them to cascade that through through the organization, right? Do you have the tools you need? Do you know what you need to do? Are the right rewards in place? Right? Is compensation appropriate? Is the right bonus structure in place? You have a job description and goals that are clear about what needs to be done, right? You'd be surprised that doesn't always happen, right? But when people know what they need to do, they're willing to rally to it, right? So that service or servant leadership. Now, when I tell that to people, I say, look, even though I'm a little bit older and white hair and I grow a beard in the wintertime, right? I'm not Santa Claus, right? So I can't give you everything. You have to make a case for it, just as I have to make business cases. And if it's the good case, more often than not, we can get it, right? But it's not a handout. This is about understanding responsibility, accountability, and earning things. So let me switch. So when
Makes
I
perfect
when I
sense. Yeah.
kicked off this discussion
Hmm.
about sort of Michael's mantra, right? We talked about three threes. So we covered the first set of three: shareholder, customer, employee. The second one is kind of hardcore project management. So anyone who's done project management knows this scope, budget, time, and it's also a balance, right? So scope is how big your box is, right? Is it a small box? Is it a big box, right? What am I dealing with, right? Can I get my hands around it? Is it huge, right? Budget often translates into resources. But guess what? You can't always get budget or resources. So sometimes you have to be creative and say, well, how can I still achieve this with what I've got? And one of the things I've taught my direct reports and people who've worked with me is don't tell me why you can't do something. If we need to do something, tell me what it would take to make it happen.
That is great
Again, I'm not
advice.
Santa Claus. I can't promise it, but
Hmm.
it switches it from a no, a short discussion, no, I can't do it, to I thought about it. Here's what would need to happen. I'd need to stop doing this thing. I would need to get some sort of training. I need my neighbor to do this other thing in this other department differently. What does it take to make it happen? Now, you can't always get that. But when people start thinking that way, it's powerful. And when it's not one person or two person, half dozen, dozens, hundreds, that's when you're in a high performing organization. So we have scope, budget, and time. You need to know your time frame, right? So the best example that maybe we've heard before is, well, need to boil the ocean. Okay, that's the scope. It's pretty big. But what are my two other variables then, right? Well, I can only give you a candle. Well, it's not going to happen overnight.
Uh-huh.
That's going to take a long, long time. Change the requirement. Boil the ocean has to happen overnight. Well, now you're talking about a whole bunch of nuclear warheads, right? So these are the way you balance things when you're thinking about your business, right? So when someone comes to you and says, well, I need you to do something different, right? Or I need you to adopt this change, start thinking about, well, what's the scope? What are the resources required? What do I need to enable this to happen? How long do I have, right? Those are the factors that you start thinking about. And it doesn't have to be a project to drive change. It could be within a running operation. And let me be clear, right? Operations as a department, some tend to be status quo. Well, this is what we've done. We've always done it. Well, that's not for me. That's not evolution. That doesn't meet that model of shareholder, customer, employee going around, right? We always have to be thinking about how to do things better. Now, as soon as I make that pitch to my teams, you know what happens? They all come to me with a million ideas. Well, we should do this. We should do that. I said, that's great. Think about it. Tell me the problem you're solving. Tell me what you need. Is it something you can do yourself? Is it something that we need departmental approval? Is it cross departmental? What's the scope, right? Think it out. Try to put it on one page, and then let's make the pitch. And if you have a whole lot of great ideas, you can put a scatter diagram where you start looking at the benefit versus effort. And then you can really start going for the low hanging fruit or the ones that have the biggest value over time, right? But you can start making informed decisions about what to work on. So that could be projects or it could be improvements within an operations, right? So that's the second set of three. And let me just knock out the last one real quick, right? It's the phrase we all know: people, process, and technology, right? It's the blending of those three. Now, why do people come first? Because people create the processes and use them, people build the technology and use it, because shareholders are people in companies, and companies are made of people, because customers are people, because employees and by extension vendors are people, right? We're all people. Until the robots come and do everything, it's people focused, right? And that's a good transition when you think about automation. So I've been automating business processes for 30 years now, starting again American Express a long time ago, right? And digital is just a variety of automation, right? These same principles apply. It's just a little bit of a different way of getting there. It's a different flavor. It's still automation, just like vanilla and chocolate. They're both ice cream. They're both good. They're just different, right? So people, process, technology. when you want to drive change, Tony, change does come with pain. It's not easy. If it were easy, it would be done already, right? So you have to think about, is this really the right change? Is it worth that pain? Where is the value going to be seen? Shareholder, customer, employee, across all of them, right? Is it worth the effort, right? Those are hard decisions. The better you can have these informed discussions with the executive levels, get the buy-in cross-functionally, and work up and down the organization so there's clarity, the better it's going to be. When you're very unclear on what needs to be done, and I know right now there's a large carrier talking with a large consulting company and a small consulting company trying to figure out how to drive their target operating model, and they got stuck in a quagmire right now because, well, no, that's not what we expected. And they've been talking about this for months. So this communication process is important. But let me pause there because we covered a lot more ground too.
Yeah, no, it's making sense. I don't have any questions on that. I am curious. No, I was going to say you transitioned to claims, but no, actually, you've done a lot of projects in claims. So no, it all makes sense. So I think you've given really good advice to the younger listeners. What for anybody running a company or a department that needs somebody like you? Are you currently open to consulting opportunities? Are you currently open to W-2 type opportunities? What are you think you're going to do next?
Well, that's a good question. So, again, a lot of experience. I've been in a lot of different places. One of the benefits I bring to whatever organization is that breadth of experience, right? So, what I found over time, Tony, is yes, you need some very specific experts, right? So, think about if you need surgery, for example, you want to go to the best surgeon, right? But you also don't need a surgeon for everything, right? If you go to a surgeon, the surgeon's going to cut, right? You have to find the right doctor to treat you in the best way and the best way you think. So because I bring all this history with me, a lot of times people ask me a question and I'll pause because I'm thinking about different experiences in my past and what would be more applicable, right? So to answer your question a little bit more directly, what I'm looking for is it's the right company with the right people who truly want to drive some change, right? Good organization that's really going to take advantage of my skills and experiences. So it's not, I've had a lot of roles where, well, this is all that we want. This is it. This is the job. And think about like a Venn diagram. Okay, that's good. Maybe it's just filling your need, but it's not taking advantage of all my skills and experience. And I'm at the point in my life now, Tony, where I want to do more, right? The old bank said, right? It's do more, right? I don't run away from work. I want to get things done. I want to help people with these sort of changes. So more specifically, it doesn't matter to me, carrier, consulting, insured tech. It's looking at this background and saying, here's how we can utilize these skills and experiences. So thank you for asking that question.
Perfect. So that's kind of it for my normal questions. When this goes live, I will tag you on LinkedIn, and so I'll include your LinkedIn profile on the show notes if anybody wants to reach out. Any closing words for the audience?
Yeah. So, you know, when I think about training or I think about any kind of advice, think of this as editorial, right? Take it or leave it. If it helps you, I'm very happy. Okay, Tony, thanks again. By the way, when are you heading to Argentina?
Been here since Saturday. It's been amazing.
Oh, you're there now?
Yes, I am madly in love with it.
I was in Argentina about, I don't know, 24 years ago. Buenos Aires is just magnificent. It's
right now
the architecture, the people. Yeah. It's this incredible blend of Europe and Latin America. It's mind-blowing.
Right now, it feels like living in Paris with the cost of living of Eastern Europe, cheaper than Eastern Europe. It's incredibly cheap right now. So yeah, we're having just a fantastic time. I don't know if I'm ever going back. I mean, I'm going to go back for conferences and stuff, but I don't know if I'll ever go back to living in the States.
It's not a bad place to live. It's one of those sort of like five or so real special places in the
I
world. It
agree.
really is.